Joining us now, you'll be seeing him all week in Clearwater, calling games pretty much day and night with Amanda Scarborough, part of a busy schedule. Of course, he calls college basketball. He's done it all at ESPN. I speak of Mark Neely. We've glad to have on the show. How you doing?
Good, Eric. It's good to be in the circle with you. And softball season is here. It's not quite as warm as we had hoped today in Clearwater, but we get pretty spoiled the last several years we've been here. And I'm hoping it stays relatively dry over the weekend. I hear we might get a little rain Saturday, Sunday, but we want to get them all in because you bring in 16 quality teams like this, you want to see them all get their a lot of games in.
No question about that, and an incredible field. And I want to ask you first about that. Give the audience a unique perspective. How do you prepare when you're basically going to see 13 teams over a matter of 4 days? You're going to get to call, you're going to get to call what, 11 games with Amanda. Take us through that preparation process, because that's not something you do all year. Even in the postseason, you really only have to worry about 4 teams in a regional.
I tell you what, Eric, it really starts as soon as I'm fortunate enough to get the call from the ESPN coordinating producers that say, hey, how about coming back to Clearwater? And it takes me about a half second to say, heck yeah, let's do that. And from that point forward, we have 13 of the 16 teams. The 3 that I don't, 2 of them I know real well in Stanford and Tennessee that I've seen quite a bit over the past few years. I see Northwestern a little bit. We'll miss them. But the other 13, it's basically I give myself a mentality like, okay, I've got a month. I'm going to dig down deep on each team for about a day and a half and try to get 2 done every 3 days. And this is before the season begins, obviously, because it just started last weekend. But just to kind of get an idea, okay, who'd they lose? Who'd they get? What's the recruiting class look like? The transfer portal, and just get an idea before heading into the first weekend. And then the games that were played last weekend, just kind of dive in and like, what happened here? Like, ooh, what's going on with UCLA? That's weird, and then you kind of get an idea about what's going on with the teams as they come into Clearwater.
No doubt. And you've got certainly teams from all different places. LSU, you've got Oklahoma State, you got Texas. Which team was coming in intrigued you the most going in to call their game? Like you were looking forward to dig in, because there were a lot of questions about Oklahoma State and their youth, especially losing Kelly Maxwell and company. You've got LSU who are coming off Beth Tarina in her 13th season, Washington in a young lineup. I mean, there was a lot of fascinating storylines there.
They all have their own unique storyline. And I'll start with, you mentioned with Oklahoma State with Kenny Gajewski, who's a tremendous coach. But like you said, not only do you lose Kelly Maxwell, but you lose her to OU, But I will say this, in our conversation with Kenny last week, and I don't think this was just spoiled grapes or whatever you want to call it, that Kelly had left. He said, you know what, down the stretch, Lexi Kilfoyle was as good or better than Kelly Maxwell. And I went back and looked at him like, you know what, he was right. Not that Kelly Maxwell isn't still an A1 ace, but Lexi was probably a little better, but there's no Cheyenne factor, no Kylie Naomi. John Barkfeld retires. There's changes on the staff. There's a lot of variables there, but Kenny's been great. They just make a habit of making their way to the Women's College World Series most years, and it'll be interesting to see how he starts this. But it's going to be weird, especially to start the season, because they're going to look a lot different.
Then you have a team like LSU that returns just about everybody offensively and adds Kelly Lynch to the circle, who can play also, who can hit a little bit.
Yeah, so let me think. Ali Kilponen, who's on the staff now, but obviously no longer pitching, and Georgia Clark are really the only 2 major deletions off the team. You got Taylor Pleasant, who's a Team USA player. Danica Coffey and Sarah Briggs. I just love to watch play because they're just so good. Briggs not only with the bat, but a 2-time Gold Glove Award winner. Which, by the way, I'm really happy that the last couple of years that Rawlings has a Gold Glove Award. That was an award that was way overdue. And Coffey, she's probably going to hit around 400 and do exactly what she does. So Beth Tarina, just solid. It's always going to be solid pitching, obviously, with her. But yeah, you're right. LSU is one of those teams when I look at of the 13 that I have, like, ooh, that team is pretty much intact. The other one that I look at that's pretty much intact that we have is Georgia. Tony Baldwin's team. They made the run. They lost to Florida State in the Super Regionals last year, but it's basically the same team. You got Shelby Walters and Madison Kerpix, and they get Lily Backus from North Carolina. And ironically, North Carolina is one of the other teams that we have here in Clearwater. But you still got Jada Kearney and Jaden Fields. And one of the favorite players, I always enjoy watching is Sydney Kuma at second base
Yeah.
for Georgia. And you kind of look at her and like, she's kind of diminutive, but she's got pop, and she is as hard nosed and as competitive as it gets on the field. So Georgia's another team that I look at like, wow, they got a lot of the same faces back, which usually this day and age is a good thing.
Yeah, I know Tony Baldwin told me he thinks this is the best roster since
Yeah.
he's been there at Georgia, which is saying a lot, considering a lot of some of the talent they've had there. And you're going to see them Friday. They play Oklahoma State early in the morning, 10 a.m. on ESPN. And then you got the UCLA, who's everybody's going to keep a focus on after the struggles last weekend against Texas and Oklahoma State. What did you make of those struggles from UCLA?
You know what, Eric? I was fortunate enough to have the Pac-12 tournament last year, the first ever Pac-12 tournament. So I got to see UCLA up close, and they did look a little off. And obviously, their last game in the Pac-12 tournament, they lost. If you had told me at that point, UCLA is not going to win another game the rest of the season, I would have looked at you like you had a hole in your head. And I think anybody would have thought that. So the way it ended last year, obviously now there's no Megan Faremo or no Rachel Garcia from a few years ago. Their pitching is as young and as inexperienced as even Kelly Inouye Perez, I think, has said that we got to figure it out. And right now it looks like Maya Brady is in her regular season form, and everybody else is trying to figure it out. You got Rob Schweier there now handling the pitching, which I thought was an interesting dynamic that Kelly mentioned to us even before the season began, that Lisa Fernandez is going to move more away from the pitching to hitting. Coach I is going to do a little bit more with pitching, but really Rob Schweier is going to be the pitching guy. So, they lost Leah Jordan and Faremo. Yeah, those are some big losses, but did I expect UCLA to get out of the gate the way they have so far? No, man, that's another surprise. And because of the way it ended last year, even though it was a different team, Eric, it's still, to me, a continuing story.
It is. It's some of a continuation there in the young pitching. We'll see how they look. A challenging slate in Clearwater for UCLA this weekend. And in fact, you'll call their last game as well on that Sunday night, ESPN, against a young UCF team that has 11 seniors. Cindy Ball, they're entering their first year as Big 12 members. Now, you and I talked off the air about, you calling a UCF basketball game recently against Kansas that went viral, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But what's your thoughts on UCF as they enter the first year in the Big 12? Because you've covered the Big 12 for many years in various sports. Your thoughts on the Knights here as you'll see them in Clearwater?
Eric, the first time UCF really got on my radar, and obviously I pay attention to all the teams in the major conferences, but when Cindy Ball Malone, when Bears team beat Michigan a few years ago, I had the Orlando Regional, had to go to OU. What happens at OU happens, but what a season. So, but they've still made the last 3 NCAA tournaments in a row. They have Sarah Willis back, unanimous conference pitcher of the year in the American last year. I think they were picked 5th.
Yeah.
It was OU, Texas, Oklahoma State, I think Baylor, and then UCF. Well, I'll correlate this to basketball. With the men's Big 12, which I do a lot of, quite frankly, when the preseason poll came out, I don't think most of the coaches knew hardly anything about UCF or Cincinnati or BYU. They knew about Houston, but the other 3 were completely undervalued compared to where they are and how good they have been in the conference. And I think UCF will be the same way. I mean, number one, when you're in one of 3 places, California, Texas, or Florida, your recruiting base is going to be close by. So I think UCF is going to be, especially when Texas and OU go vamoose to the SEC next year. Yeah, Arizona's coming in. There's going to be some changes as well, but I don't see why UCF can't be one of the big players in the Big 12.
Yeah, and you got to witness the basketball side a few weeks back when UCF hosted Kansas in the up there at the Additional Financial Arena, sold-out crowd, where they upset Kansas. You were working with Michael Dono, who's a friend of mine, and all craziness broke loose when UCF won the game. There's a court storming, and somebody threw a shoe, right? And near the crew. Tell us I haven't heard your side of the story. I've heard Michael Dono's side of the story, but I've not heard your side of the story in this.
Eric, there really isn't much to my side of the story. I just, when the game ended, fortunately, there was a security officer, not that they were coming for us, but the way the students were coming around the table, they were kind of knocking off the monitor and kicking around some stuff. And we were hoping we didn't lose power or something crazy like that. But fortunately, one of the security people got out in front and started motioning them away. And I was kind of watching him. And the next thing I know, Mike picks up a shoe. Mike's to my right, and he goes, somebody lost a shoe. And he picks up the shoe, and he's showing it around. And he set the shoe down. And we kind of continued with this big story that was going on there. And I don't know what happened to the shoe after that, quite frankly. I don't know if the shoe owner came back and eventually picked it up. I think so. But yeah, that was a crazy game. It was a crazy night. I remember talking with Mike before the game, and he said, "Man, I just hope we keep it close." And I'm like, I think this is going to be. Looking at the Big 12 this year, there's no great team. I mean, this is not out of the question. I didn't know Kansas was going to lose, but I definitely knew UCF had a decent shot with a score like Jalen Sellers and the length of Diallo. But that was a crazy night. That it was fun to see, just seeing a school brand new in the conference, because I had UCF the week before at Kansas State in their conference opener, and they got absolutely hammered by K-State. Never led at any point in the game, and looked a little wide-eyed, like, "Ooh, this is the Big 12 road game." Home's different. Winning in the Big 12 is a lot different story on the road, and it was a much different story that night in Orlando.
Yeah, they've been very played well in the toughest conference in college basketball. That's, depending where you look at projection wise, could be a 9 to 10 bid league, depending on how things shake out. And from a softball standpoint, you got Oklahoma and Texas, you mentioned, for the last year, but Oklahoma State, Baylor, is a lot of high expectations for them, and I think UCF feels they could fit there. You mentioned the changes next year. How much does realignment change or maybe make it a little more challenging? Is that something that you kind of make a note of, that, hey, this could be next year, they're going to be in a completely different conference? I mean, it's unique because you're so used to seeing a certain teams in a league for so many years, and now there's going to be changes, like a UCF, for example. It's like you got to remind yourself, oh wait, they're in this conference now.
It is a lot to take in, Eric. There's so many changes going on. I'll say this, and obviously this is all done. The changes are football driven. I mean, football drives the bus. I mean, everybody knows that. But from a standpoint of softball, it's really disappointing. I hate to see the Pac-12 going away, just because of the history that conference holds in our sport of softball. It really, it's the cradle, really, of softball. I mean, and yes, it's UCLA and Arizona, but it's other teams as well. And now it's going to be gone. It's going to be weird. I did hear Coach Kelly Inouye Perez for UCLA. Someone asked her, the UCLA Arizona series is always looked forward to because of the history of the schools. Can that eventually come back, or at least to continue? And she was optimistic about it, and I hope that's the case, that those two schools get a chance to play each other. But I'm really heartbroken that the Pac-12 is going away. I mean, we finally got a conference tournament, the Pac-12, and we're all in Tucson last year saying how great this is. And now whoever goes to the second and turns out final Pac-12 tournament this year, it's going to be a little heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's so unique when you think of Stanford, Washington, and UCLA, who's in the field here in Clearwater. They're going to be in different conferences a year from now. Stanford will be in the ACC, and then Washington and UCLA will be in the Big Ten. It's just kind of bizarre, especially in softball, where the Pac-12 is so rich in softball. It's like the big part of the identity. It's going to be weird.
Absolutely. Like we said, the Pac-12, most of the history of softball is in the Pac-12. So it'll be sad. And the travel for those kids.
Yeah.
Going to be absolutely insane. Absolutely insane.
We're speaking with ESPN's Mark Neely here on In the Circle. I want to ask you about your career in fascinating. How you've been at ESPN for a long time now. What was your first year at ESPN?
First thing I ever did was the AA All-Star game in 2000. And then in 2001, a gentleman named Tim Scanlon, who was the coordinating producer of Major League Baseball for ESPN, said, "Hey, you want to start doing MLB games for us?" And that was like, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to start doing Major League Baseball games for ESPN. So that started in 2001. When ESPNU started, it began, I want to say, in 2005 or 6. And they started doing even more events and more conferences and more sports. Because I remember they came to me and said, "Hey, have you ever done soccer and volleyball?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, sure." That was a flat out lie, Eric. I mean, I had never done any of those sports. So I got a chance to do that. And as I started doing more sports, it led to softball and different. And softball's been, college baseball are two of my favorites, especially college softball. So it kind of began there and has evolved over the years.
Do you remember the first time you called softball at ESPN? What year you got started hooked
into
that?
I want to say 2004 or 5.
Wow.
I can remember seeing the Monica Abbott era at the old facility in Knoxville. I remember Jessica Mendoza's first ever game that she did as an analyst. We were in Austin, Texas. Kat Osterman was pitching for Texas, and that was Jessica's first game. So whatever year that would have been. So, and look what she's done since. And it's going to be great to have her back here in Clearwater this year.
She'll be part of the crew there with Mallins and Smith. And that's what's unique about your career is you've worked with just about everybody. I feel like, I mean, I'm not sure who's missing on the list, especially even during the season. You've worked with Michele Smith. You've worked with Scarborough, obviously, many years. You've worked with both of them at the same time. You've worked with Kenzie Fowler. You've worked with Jenny Dalton-Hill. That's where I first met you. I remember in Greenville for the American Conference Championship. You were with Jenny Dalton-Hill, who was kind of starting in broadcasting at that time.
Yeah, Danielle Laurie quite a bit in recent years.
Danielle Laurie, many years. Carol Bruggerman, most recent years. How do you do that? Because I mentioned a lot of those names. A lot of times you're working with different people in one season. So yeah, every analyst has their own different style. Is it, so what has that been like to work with so many different people and different personalities?
Yeah. Eric, the one thing they all have in common is an extreme passion for the game of softball. So it starts with that. They share that, but then everybody's personality is a little bit different. And how I will set up Danielle Laurie for certain things is much different than maybe Carol Bruggerman or Amanda Scarborough. They have slightly different personalities. Some of them a big difference. I mean, Danielle is it's almost like she's out there still pitching at times. Amanda's very cerebral. She's always, I can see her head spinning just thinking about pitches and pitch selection and maybe what she would do in that situation. And Carol Bruggerman's got this huge, wide, big picture look at the game with her job right now, running NFCA and stuff. So they all have different personality, and all are great friends and all do their jobs extremely well. And it's fun to kind of get to know where their comfort zones are. And that's really a good play-by-play announcer's job, is to put the analyst in their comfort zone, let them do what they do best.
Do you remember when you started feeling comfortable calling softball games? Where you was there a person that really helped you kind of get comfortable with it when you first started doing it?
Yeah, because of I did a ton of years in minor league baseball. When I got out of school, my main career objective, maybe to a fault, was I wanted to make it to Major League Baseball as a team's voice or do a lot of Major League Baseball. And I got to do both. I got to do Major League Baseball with ESPN, and eventually I did was the San Diego Padres TV announcer for a while. But because of the similarities with baseball and softball, it was just a natural fit, the bat and ball sport. And it was, in many ways, a better product. And I say this quietly because I do college baseball for ESPN as well. Now that we're inserting the pitch clock back in to kind of speed things back up again, I thought if we can get back where those games are averaging 155, right around 2 hours, like they did for so many years, that product on television is gold, man. And, people love it. You look at the ratings. So I'm very optimistic about change, adding the clock. I hope it, eventually spreads throughout softball, and we kind of keep the pace going, because when that flow and that pace, and you know what, Eric, I'll say this. I don't care if a game's 2.5 or 3 hours long, as long as it has pace. Yeah. Just keep the pace going. There's a difference. But if there's a lot of standing around, or the infielders after every pitch come in towards the circle and then go back out and eat up all this time, game doesn't need that.
I would agree with that, and I think that's kind of they're trying to address that, and we're seeing that. I mean, I think both softball and college baseball have kind of grown in interest. I mean, last year the World Series for the men's side was the most watched. I mean, it was really gained in interest there. Do you sense that, having covered both, that softball, because it used to be when you first started, you barely would see games even broadcast, and if they were, maybe there was just the postseason or the World Series. Now, I mean, we got like softball here. We got a marquee tournament week 2. We just had games on last weekend. Baseball's going to have more coverage than ever before. Have you seen that growth from both?
Eric, I think college softball in many ways kind of was the torchbearer for many years for women's sports. This is year 5 for the Clearwater Invitational, my 3rd in a row. And I know, with Caitlin Clark and what she's doing in women's basketball right now, it's taken the lead as far as eyeballs right now, because it's still basketball season and all. But I thought college softball really was that for women's sports, and it did. Like I said, you look at the ratings, ratings are outstanding, and they have been great. The fact that women's basketball has garnered more attention, it's just great for women's sports, and it's way overdue that women's sports gets the eyeballs and the attention on television that they're starting to get, and it continues to evolve.
No doubt. You're right. It's been, volleyball's grown in the fall there, and more
Yes.
coverage as well in the women's sports landscape. You're right. I think, but you're right. Softball was kind of the first one when people picked up notice and the great, ratings that they would get and viewership and the excitement of the sport that certainly, I think the other sports have kind of fed off of that.
No, you mentioned volleyball, and I should not have omitted that. And I don't want to say there's a big three in women's sports, but there's a big three in women's sports, and I think it's women's college basketball, volleyball, and softball.
I agree. I call volleyball in the fall. I had to bring that up as well. You know how it is. You have multiple sports there. You mentioned the Clearwater. Describe being part of this. You mentioned it's your third year. I mean, this is the marquee tournament of the sport in February. It is like I've covered it now every year, basically. It's like a mini World Series prep, if you will. What is it like being around it? You're calling games all day, but then you're also like there's games going on when you're not calling games. What is that? Describe that from your perspective.
And Eric, that's always been the philosophy. Even though we're doing a game on field 9, you can kind of see and hear the crowd on the adjacent field 8. And when you hear a lot of noise over there, we'll talk, hey, what just happened over at field 8? We can even kind of switch between games. So we like to give the viewer more than just that solo look at maybe whatever team their team is playing right now, just to get a wider view of it, which I think is the beauty of this tournament. Not only because of the setting and Clearwater, and the fans want to come here, and the tickets are hard to get and they sell out all the time, but it has a different vibe. Once you get into the postseason with regionals and supers, and then into Oklahoma City, there's obviously the drive to win, and not that isn't here, but there's more an air of congeniality, competitiveness, but not really that hard edge that you get in the postseason for softball. And I don't think that's a negative thing. I think teams are trying to learn about themselves. They respect the caliber of opponents that they're getting to play down here, and they realize that's a good thing. And many times when you lose down here, it makes you a better team down the road. And there's no bigger example of that than 2 years ago with Texas.
Yeah.
They got smoked here. I want to say that they played at least 5 games and they lost all 5. Yeah. And they wound up making it to the finals and were the runner-up to OU in the Women's College World Series. I mean, they were just getting clocked here. And I think Mike White would admit, and probably even did say so, you know what? Clearwater helped us out a lot. It showed us our holes where we needed to fix, and they did, and they turned out having a great season.
You're right. They went winless. People thought the sky was falling, and you're right. They kind of grew them because it's early adversity, right? I mean, that's the thing. Fans will make a big deal of the results this weekend from the standpoint like, oh, what does that mean, the big picture? But there's still time to get better if the things don't go well. Or on the other hand, if things go really well, it could be a takeoff for a great season like it was for Northwestern couple years ago.
Absolutely. And on our Zoom call with the Wisconsin head coach, Yvette Healy, yesterday, she just flat out came out and said it. You know what? She said, if we win a game in Clearwater, that'll be good for us. Not that she's not going to try to win more, but she realizes that even one game in Clearwater for her program right now is a huge deal. Now, all these 16 teams are everybody's got their own little story going on and different feeling about what it would make this weekend successful for them. But for some like Wisconsin, it's winning a game and being able to play the caliber of competition here before they get into Big Ten play.
Give the audience an idea what your year is like. You mentioned you're calling college baseball, you call softball, you call in college basketball. How do you balance that out from a prep when they're so different sports and keep track with all? Give us an idea, for example, what would be the most craziest week you've had in recent years? A week where you're like, I can't believe I did this and this and this in a matter of short period of time and prep for that.
Eric, my personal experience, it's for now with college basketball, and I primarily do Big 12 for men's basketball. So I see a lot of the same teams over and over, which makes my prep time not as difficult. Yeah, there's changes. There's going to be prep time, but it's not as intense. And in many ways, it's the same with softball, with the exception of now getting ready for this, because we haven't seen or broadcast any games up until this past weekend and now with Clearwater. So it's kind of a lot of prep up front. for me, quite frankly, the most difficult thing is 2 college football games in the same week. There was a stretch where I used to do Thursday and Saturday games for ESPN, and preparing for 4 football teams that each have 80 players on them. And yes, maybe
Wow.
only 45 are going to see the field, but that's still like 180 guys. That prep is intense to do 2 football games in a week. Not that this is a cakewalk, but it's nothing compared to that.
Well, especially with the double numbers in college football,
Yeah,
which is
I
the
wish they'd get
nightmare
rid of
for
those.
broad. Yes, everybody. Why haven't we done this yet? I feel like they should. You guys, as broadcasters, should unify on this. Like, how do we allow this? We have the same number in 2 different. Like, you're just being set up to fail.
If you have more than 100 players on your team, they shouldn't all be dressing out.
That's very fair. How much of your notes from Clearwater will you save? Because there's a good chance you might see these teams again later in the season.
I save everybody's notes until I see them again, just so I have something as a base. Like, okay, when I saw them last, whether it was 2 weeks ago or a month ago or 2 months ago, where were they? Okay, where's this player gone? So I always keep everything until I see that team again, and then I update it and move forward with that. But I really do that for every sport. Where if you want to see my last time I had Kansas State in football this past year, I've got the full board and all that, and I keep it until the next time I see him. So that's kind of the way I operate.
That's a lot of stuff. Like,
There's a lot of
great.
stuff in the closet at home. Yeah, that's broadcast related.
Well, I feel better about that because my room is similar, and I always get grief about it. Like, why do you have so much stuff? I mean, like even cases. This is like VHS tapes that I used to have.
I was going to say, in the back, it looks like you got VHS tapes for those.
Yeah, because I used to, back when VHS was a thing, I would tape games in advance of getting ready to broadcast stuff. Like, I mean, that was the ultimate way. Now we could just DVR everything. It's all technical, so it's easier now. Back in the day, but yeah, I have tons of notes. Like, I'm, getting ready for broadcast as we talk. It's tremendous. You met Amanda. I want to ask you about Amanda because obviously she's one of my favorites. We just had her on the podcast. She's been on frequently. Speak to her growth in the game because she's a prominent voice now in the game. And you came in when she was still playing at A&M, and just see her rise to the sport because she's right there, obviously, with Michele. And you mentioned Jessica Mendoza. I didn't realize you had worked with Mendoza when she started. That's 3 big time names in the sport as far as commentary, and maybe among the best in all sports.
I love Amanda's analytical mind because it's just always churning. I'll admit I'm a play-by-play guy, so my analytical mind doesn't need to be going 100% of the time during the broadcast. I need to be listening to the producer and communicating with the director some. And there are sometimes I just look out, like here in Clearwater, and it's a really nice sunny day and the palm trees, and I'm like, wow, this is really nice, man. There's a softball game going on. So my analytical mind kind of shuts down. That never happens for somebody like Amanda. I mean, it's always moving every pitch. Where was that pitch location? She's thinking ahead. She's just really that analytical. But her knowledge of the game, people forget that she hit as well as pitched, as she was known mainly as a pitcher in Texas A&M, but knows that side of it as well. And she's pretty low key for the most part. She's a really, I'll give you guys a little secret. I have a nickname for Amanda. I may be the only one that calls her this, and it's not a unique nickname, but because she's from Texas, I just call her Tex all the time. I've never called her that on air, but just privately, I'm like, hey, Tex, where do you want to go with this? What do you want to talk about in the next segment and stuff? So I think she likes it. She is from Texas. She's a Texas girl, but she's a lot more low key than most Texas women that I've met over the years. And I think that even keel that she keeps on the air is obviously her style, but I think viewers are attracted to that. Too many times these days, it's all about being loud, being aggressive. What's your hot take? What's this and that? And Amanda, in a very controlled way, is able to just articulate what's in her mind, which is a very advanced thinking, and make it simple for the average viewer.
No doubt. And I think she's tremendous and awesome to listen to. And you two are great together when you always call games, which is kind of remarkable because, like I said, you're always kind of spread out. You don't work all the time every week. And yet, when you do get together, it seems like you've worked all year. Is that the sense you get when you're in the booth?
Yeah, and I think that I feel that way with Michele Smith or Danielle Laurie. all the different ones, Carol Bruggeman, that I've worked with so much over the years. As soon as we reconnect, it's just like we didn't miss any time at all. And again, there's a communication that goes on with everybody, even during the season. Like, hey, you saw this team. What happened? Give me the feedback on that. And everybody likes to stay in touch.
No, that's great. Is there a sport you have not called you would like to call before your career's done?
Wow.
Because you've called a lot of different sports.
True, very true. Maybe eventually I'll have to call pickleball, since that's now the sport of rage.
That's
I don't know. I've played it a few times. It can give you some cardio. I like that aspect of it. It just, I don't think so, Eric. It's been a really good career. And I like kind of the pocket I'm in. Many years ago, like I said, my goal was do Major League Baseball and pro baseball, and I did that for a lot of years. But I haven't gotten any younger, and the grind of doing professional baseball I don't think people appreciate it. It's every day.
Sure.
For 6 months. I mean, when you're in the big leagues, okay, you got a Monday off, but on that Monday, you're usually either traveling or you just don't have much time for the family. And when I got out of Major League Baseball, I went back to ESPN full time, and it definitely allowed me more time with my wife and son. My son, who's now 21 years old and is a senior in college and playing college baseball at an NAIA school. I would have never had a chance to see him as much as I do if I'd continued to do Major League Baseball. So I like the pocket where basketball, there's some days off in between, and softball, the same thing, instead of that day after day after day of Major League Baseball, which is what makes it great. Major League 162 games, but the people who work in it day in, day out, man, it's a mental grind.
Then you got people like Jess, who does studio for Major League Baseball, does games, does the World Series on the radio. I mean, and now balancing both baseball and softball in her career.
And she has done some really important things for women in broadcasting, because as great a hitter as she is and was during her playing time in college, and then when she did the pros and the Olympics, I think there was a misconception from too many people who thought about it the wrong way, thinking that's softball and this is baseball. Somebody that played softball can't break down a baseball swing and stuff like that. Absolutely, no, she can. She knows what it's like. That swing, the similarities are very similar. If anything, the fact that baseball doesn't have a rise ball, where the ball actually does rise.
Yeah.
Some people say, oh, the fastball, it kind of looked like it. No, that's an optical illusion. The baseball is not actually rising. The softball is rising. It's much different, harder to do. And I think she made it, it's the best word, she made it acceptable that women can speak intelligently about the men's sport of Major League Baseball. And that's way overdue. I mean, you don't have to have somebody who hit 500 home runs be the person to break down a swing. Many of them can't articulate that, but Jess can, and does it really well, and continues to do so. And I think she's opened up a lot of eyes for people like, what, a woman can do that. And that's good for everybody.
And open a lot of doors. Now it's
yes.
I mean, we've seen that in baseball. They just the Oakland A's just had a play-by-play female voice announced there.
Which, by the way, her name is Jenny Kavnar.
Yeah.
And when I did San Diego Padre games as the play-by-play announcer, Jenny was on our sideline. She's great. I've known Jenny for a long time. Very happy for her. And the fact that she's the first full-time woman doing Major League Baseball is great. She's awesome. She's been around baseball her whole life. Her dad was a baseball coach. She grew up in Colorado. So congratulations to Jenny. That's another big thing. And just another big step, an important step in women in sports.
I did not know that connection. I feel like we should play like the 6 Degrees of Mark Neely. Just see, I feel like you're connected to somebody, like every sport in here. It's pretty wild. That's awesome.
It pretty much with the different sports, if you don't know a person, you know somebody who knows them for sure. And in all the different sports. Yeah, Jenny's great. She's going to do great with Dallas. I worked with Dallas Braden at ESPN some. I tell you what, that's a wild cat right there.
Yes.
And I mean that in only a loving way. He is a lot of fun. He and I did Little League with ESPN one year in San Bernardino, just doing game after game after game. And he's a hoop, man. He's fun.
Yeah, it is. Dallas Braden is fun. Yeah, that's a fun group. And you're fun, man. And like I said, I appreciate you taking the time for a busy schedule. I mean, Clearwater's like your adopted home here for the next few days. You're going to be camped out at Field 8 or Field 9 pretty much the whole weekend. But folks can catch Mark Neely with obviously Amanda Scarborough as far as the entire ESPN crew on the ESPN family of networks all weekend. The Clearwater tournament, one of the marquee tournaments. You're going to be on. I'm going to read this. You're going to be on ACC Network, ESPNU, ESPN Plus, SEC Network, and ESPN throughout the weekend.
Yeah, it's so many games that I have to look at the chart myself, Eric, to be sure. I know we start with Kentucky, North Carolina tomorrow, I believe, on ACC Network.
Yep, 11 a.m.
And we just go from there. And we finish up on Sunday with the UCLA game on the big boat, as we call it, the main ESPN.
ESPN, part of a big doubleheader on the main ESPN, which is a big step too for the tournament as well, to get that marquee Sunday night slot.
Yeah, and to get two of them now. I know we've had one in the past, and now to add another one is awesome.
No question. Well, it's awesome to talk to you, and always great to listen to you call softball, Mark. Have a great weekend in Clearwater. Have a great season in softball. We look forward to hearing you throughout the season. And thanks for everything you've done for the sport of softball. Like I said, there's many fans that on our podcast that have asked to get you on the show, and they're big fans of yours. So I appreciate you telling your story.
Eric, happy to be in the circle with you. Anytime you want me to come back, love to do it. Thanks so much.